Well, first, hello, and thank you for joining me today on today's webinar. My name is Samuel, and I'm the Head of Communications for UPI. Today's presentation, I'll be talking about securing admission to universities in the world's top study destinations and what Indian students can do to stay ahead. When you're considering studying abroad, students ask themselves, in most cases, the same questions. First, do I qualify? Much of this is learning about the admission requirements and how they differ amongst institutions and amongst study destinations. Not just limited to academic requirements, but it also includes English requirements. Can I afford it? It's not just about considering the tuition fees of an institution, but also the travel and cost of living in different countries. What if I don't qualify? We get asked this question a lot. What happens if a student fails to meet the academic requirements, or the English requirements, or the financial requirements? Are there any solutions? And we'll talk about that today, and I'll be able to outline some potential options for those who don't meet all of the requirements for entry to university abroad. Asked, will I get a student visa? Getting a student visa can be an intimidating thing to think about, and I'll touch a little bit on that towards the end of the presentation. But it is a fact that hundreds of thousands of Indian students are getting visas to study abroad, but it's also the case that thousands of students are getting rejected. So we'll talk about what those reasons might be and how to avoid those reasons. So let's just go and look at the common features of why people want to study abroad. Most of you would be sharing the similar reasons as to why you'd want to study abroad, so I'll go through them very quickly. These countries that you see above, the United States, Australia, Canada, United Kingdom, New Zealand, they would represent many of the top study destinations for Indian students when looking at study abroad. And for those, we might have some people joining the webinar that are not from India, and obviously that relates to all students wanting to study abroad. But for Indian students, statistically, these countries represent very popular destinations. So world-renowned for academic excellence, access to advanced technology and facilities, getting international exposure, attractive career opportunities, and they can be seen as safe with good standards of living. And I suppose, generally speaking, if anyone had the chance to study abroad, I would absolutely recommend that you do this. I have not met one student that has studied abroad and has regretted doing so. It just gives you so much opportunity, whether it's making friends, networking, advancing your career opportunities when you come back at home, or if you decide to stay. Studying abroad is certainly something that we encourage if you have the chance at all to do so. So let's get right to it and look at how a student can secure admission to universities abroad. In other words, how can a student be accepted by a university when making an application? So at the undergraduate and postgraduate level, students must meet academic requirements. So this should be of no surprise. And these academic requirements vary among study destination and universities. You have English requirements. You have English requirements, meaning that you must attend some specific exams in order to meet the English requirements of a particular university. And you would have probably heard of exams like IELTS, TOEFL, PTE, CPE, and there are plenty more. Some of them are even offered by the universities directly. So we're going to go to another important requirement, and that is the financial requirements. Can I afford to study abroad? Again, when you're considering studying abroad, you're not just looking at tuition costs. You're looking at tuition plus living costs, plus travel and health insurance, and all that entails studying abroad. One way to meet the requirements of studying abroad is demonstrating personal finances. This can be your own bank statements, your parents' or family members' bank statements, or especially for those who have agreed to help you finance your international studies. When you're providing proof of your financial resources, more is definitely better. Give the visa officer as much information as you can, and don't worry about giving too much information. The visa officer will normally look at a number of things. Previous financial and immigration history, source of income. Then when we look at student loans, this could be any loan contract that you have from the government or a bank such as Credila, who specialize in providing student loans for international students. Then we obviously have scholarships and financial aid. Scholarships are mostly based on merit, and although they're very competitive and not easy to obtain, a lot of eligible students don't bother applying for them. And our advice is that there's no harm in trying. There are thousands of scholarships out there for international students, and it's just a case of making an effort and start looking. And one of the great places to start looking is the actual university that you're applying to. And there are plenty others, both domestic and overseas, that you can look at. So before we go to the next slide, we've covered the very basics of meeting the requirements to study abroad, and that's the English, academic, and financial requirements. This particular table here gives you a bit of a snapshot as to the admission requirements that you would be expected to have. So looking at the English requirements, for example, you would be asked to do specific English exams. For example, TOEFL and IELTS in the United States. The United Kingdom is quite different compared to all the other countries. If you notice all the other countries, you could do an IELTS or a TOEFL, and there are others. I'm sure you've heard of PTE, for example, and again, there are others. But for the United Kingdom, it's important to note that it's actually mandatory to do the IELTS exam that's specific for the UK in order to get your student visa. If you do, for example, the PTE and try to get a student visa to go to the United Kingdom, you might have no luck. The standard admissions test. As you can see, the United States is a little bit different to the rest of the countries. And that means that there are standard admissions tests required for the United States when looking at undergraduate study. The Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand only require that you submit your high school grades or your 10+2 grades from India. However, in the United States, you'll be required to perform standard admissions tests, which is basically to determine the academic suitability of students when applying at universities. And they will combine that with your high school grades in order to determine whether or not you can study at their universities. Looking at the column of tuition and cost per living, that represents the financial commitment that a student will have to make in order to study at a particular university in a particular country. So now you can start seeing the differences between the different countries as to what the average cost of tuition would be. This represents what I would say are the minimum average tuition costs that you would expect. There are some universities, as you might know, that are a lot more expensive than what you're seeing there, but this represents the average. And the cost of living, again, is the average financial commitment that you'd be looking to make. Going back to the English requirements, on average, these countries would require somewhere around 6.0 to in a band of no less than 5.5 for IELTS, and some universities will require 6.5 overall and a band of no less than 6. And again, you might find universities that are a little bit different to that, but that is the average. Looking at postgraduate studies, Again, we'll talk about the slight differences when looking at the English requirements. The United States, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, for the most part, you'd be able to do an IELTS exam or the TOEFL. But again, in the United Kingdom, you would have to do the IELTS exam in order to get your student visa. In terms of standardized admissions test, the US and Canada are now unique in the sense that you would be required to undergo an admissions test, again, to look at the academic suitability for entry. And in United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, you would only need to provide proof that you have a bachelor degree. So going to the academic grades, United States and Canada are also different in the sense that you will need either a 4-year bachelor or a 3-year bachelor plus master's. So for Indian students who complete a 3-year bachelor degree, this is where you'll have to find other options beyond just your bachelor degree in order to be eligible for a postgraduate. It is true that in the United States and Canada there might be a few universities that accept 3-year bachelor degree, but they are quite rare. So for the majority of universities, these would be the requirements. These would represent what I would say is the minimum fees of tuition. Again, depending on the school and depending on the program that you're applying for, it can be a lot greater than these fees. And again, the cost of living per year in these study destinations are no different whether you're studying a postgraduate or an undergraduate degree. So now we've covered, we've touched on the very basic requirements for direct entry into universities in terms of English, academics, and the financial commitments that would be needed. Now, what happens if you fail to meet requirements for direct entry? That's what I want to talk about today, because a lot of students that we talk to, they might not meet the academic requirements, they might not have enough money, or they might have gone through an IELTS exam and got a 5.5 instead of a 6, and now they want to know what options are available. Well, there are options, and that's the good news. And what I'll talk about now is alternative pathways that are available to secure entry to university abroad. And that's normally required when students fail to meet the academic requirements for entry, when they fail to meet the English requirements for entry, or when they cannot meet the financial requirements or cannot demonstrate the ability to fund their tuition and living costs. Now, there are a number of pathways that students can access in order to fulfill their goal of studying abroad. There are things like bridging courses, bridging courses where you would be able to go to your university of choice on the agreement that you do a number of courses where you're not meeting the requirements. It might be a math course or a physics course. Or it could be English. There are some universities where if you fall short of meeting the English requirements, they would allow you to join their university on the basis that you do perhaps 10 to 20 weeks of ELICOS, where you're studying intensive English classes in order to get to the level that is required to join that university. All of those options are available, but they do cost money, so you'd have to pay more than the costs of the bachelor or postgraduate degree that you're applying for, and it can take time as well. So some of the options might be a foundation year where you're studying for an entire year, and then upon finishing that, you would be able to start your bachelor or master's degree. So you'd have to consider the extra time and the extra cost that would entail. What I would like to talk about and I'm really excited about being able to introduce this to you, is what we would consider a more modern pathway in order to achieve your objective of studying abroad. And that's what we call a multi-pathway program. Now, University Pathways International, which is the company I work for, specializes in multi-pathway program. And this is becoming a very popular option for students who do not meet one or more of the requirements to study directly abroad. So I'll talk a bit more about that and their benefits. So a multi-pathway program, they are available for undergraduate and postgraduate programs. Multi-pathway program allows a student to secure entry to universities in Australia, the US, Canada, the UK, and New Zealand. Programs that are offered are also enabling students to get up to 2 years of credit transfer into a related bachelor degree and up to 1 year for a related master's. Students can save up to $50,000 US towards the cost of completing a university degree abroad. My understanding is that's about 33 lakhs. The program does not necessarily require a minimum IELTS score. However, it does include an IELTS or PTE preparation course. So in other words, students are able to join as long as they're able to show enough English competence to complete the program. And throughout the program, we will work with them and offer them free resources in order for them to be ready to do their IELTS exam by the end of this program. And these programs are flexible programs that are delivered online, allowing for daily enrollment and fast-tracking options. Now, going on the last point, some people worry about the concept of online learning, but let me just say that with the advancements of technology, it's becoming it's becoming a much more credible and relied upon learning experience. Now you're seeing, some of the top universities in the world offer online learning, and some of the benefits of online learning that we offer would be the learning support that combines online learning and traditional learning methods, including one-on-one coaching. We do lectures via video conference. We do webinars, which is like a virtual classroom. And the learning support allows a student to not just be left alone to figure out how to go about and get through the program, but it's very much a blended learning experience. And the flexibility that comes with online learning, where a student can work part-time, they can study from home, they can study at the local library, or even a study center, which is a facility where students can learn in a group environment. So the great thing about the multi-pathway program is that it allows students who don't meet the academic or English or financial requirements to pursue their goals of studying abroad. And I'll just go to a few examples that will demonstrate that. This would be an example where a student fails to meet the academic requirements of studying at a particular university abroad. So if we read here, Alice did not achieve the minimum grades at high school to meet the academic requirements for direct entry to university abroad. Although she can consider a one-year foundation course, this will cost more time, it'll cost more money, and that's in addition to completing a full degree abroad from scratch. So with a multi-pathway program, Alice can enroll with a total cost of about $5,500, and she can enroll immediately. She doesn't have to wait for an intake later on down the track in 4 to 6 months from now. She can enroll today. So with this program, by the time she finishes, she can secure entry to many universities abroad. She will also be eligible to secure up to 2 years of credit transfer in her own chosen degree. So looking at that example, instead of costing more money and time, Alice can actually save time and save lots of money. Look at another example. We have John now, who dreams of studying a bachelor degree in Australia, but his family cannot afford to finance, whether it's cash or loan, 3 years of university in Australia, which would normally cost in excess of 100,000 Australian dollars. That's a lot of money. So it's easy to understand how students could be under financial stress when looking at studying 3 years or 4 years abroad. In this example, John can enroll in a multi-pathway program at a cost of $5,500. After completing his program, he can secure entry to many universities in Australia, and this is because UPI, as an example, have credit transfer agreements with a number of universities that recognize our program and will agree to provide credit transfer. That's one of the big benefits, where students can immediately start their undergraduate or postgraduate studies at home with the flexibility and the ability to do it at a much lesser cost. John, again, will be eligible to secure up to 2 years of credit transfer towards his chosen degree. The flexible program allows John to save time and complete his program in 12 to 18 months. So what that means is, because the program is done online, there are no set dates where students need to do exams. This is done on the student's own time and own schedule. So we have many students, for example, that can get their 2 years of credit, and they're finishing their program in 12 to 14 months. If a student wants to work hard and study full time and put the effort, the ability to save time as well as save money can be a huge advantage. And again, by completing the equivalence of 2 years of university in India, John can save over 60,000 Australian dollars. Now that's a significant amount of savings. So just to break that down, if you consider the average tuition fees in Australia of 20,000 Australian dollars, 2 years of that equals $40,000. Then if you add the living costs of being in Australia for 2 years, you're adding almost another $35,000 on top of that. So combining that and looking at the pathway program at a cost of $5,500, you can see the considerable cost savings, as well as the saving of time, where John can access. So because of this example, and because looking at this example and the benefits of multi-pathway programs, John is now able to afford to pursue his dream of studying abroad. And we also have students that would look at the multi-pathway program not necessarily because they don't meet the academic, English, or financial requirements, but it's simply a good idea in the sense of saving money. The ability to save money and time can be good for anyone, whether or not they meet the requirements for direct entry. So the examples that we've shown and the benefits of the multi-pathway program allows UPI to help you stay ahead of your peers by starting your degree sooner. Lower barrier to entry. What I mean by that is we don't have particular grades that are required at the high school level. We only require students to successfully complete high school or their 10+2. Finishing sooner. As we looked at one of the examples, students who are able to start sooner are able to finish sooner. And at the same time, they can accelerate that time where they can finish sooner by doing fast-track studying. And as the example that I showed you, students are able to get 2 years of credit in much less than 2 years. And one of the great benefits of having a multi-pathway program is that you're getting 2 qualifications rather than just one. The qualifications that we're offering are, UK based. They are government accredited qualifications that allow a student to get a vocational qualification prior to going abroad and studying. And that could have its own advantages, because if you have a vocational qualification and then when you arrive overseas to study, then it might be easier for you to find employment if you're looking to work part-time and study at the same time. So that is what I wanted to talk about in terms of the pathway opportunities. So now, looking back, we have looked at direct entry to universities abroad, and we've also touched on pathways to get to that same destination and the benefits included in those pathways. What I did not touch on, which I'd like to do now, is once we are ready to study abroad, once we're ready to do the application, whether it's direct or after we've completed a pathway program, I just want to talk about the different steps that students would need to look at. And this is very similar to all the countries. There are certain areas where the US, for example, would require more requirements, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. So, academic transcripts. These include academic transcripts for all the qualifications that you will list in your application form. The TOEFL or IELTS score. So you'd need to be submitting a certified copy of that to the school for them to confirm whether or not you meet the requirements. SOP, I want to spend a bit of time talking about SOP. That means statement of purpose. And this could be one of the most important elements of the application process. The statement of purpose gives the university, as well as the visa officer, a chance to get to know you as a person and the reasons for selecting the university, your chosen program, and your career and life goals. Now, they're not wanting, you don't need to write your whole life story here, but it's a chance for you to demonstrate that you're a genuine student and explain with clarity what you want from this program. And universities pay a lot of attention to this statement of purpose. So I definitely would take my time, I would research, get some advice on how to produce a good quality statement of purpose, and it's something that I would not rush. And if you do this right, it'll definitely help you if you meet the other requirements. Another important thing is to remain within the word limit set by the university. So if they say, write your statement of purpose in 2,000 words, don't try to impress them with 10,000 words, because that won't help. And sometimes they want to see if you can demonstrate, or if you're able to explain clearly what you want to communicate with some instructions. Your passport, you need to provide a photocopy of your passport. Work experience certificates, if applicable. Now, this may be required if you put this in your application for any reason. If you put it in, obviously you need to show evidence of this work experience. It's often required when you need to explain study gaps. Now, a study gap is when, as an example, if you apply in 2017 and you finished high school in 2015, they would like to know what you've done between 2015 and 2017. And it's often required that if the reason for this gap is because you worked, then they just want to see evidence that you have worked. For the interview, obviously that is part of the process. You will most likely be interviewed by someone at the university. It could be by telephone, it could be by Skype, and it's often the case that you need to be prepared for the interview at the visa level, which I'll talk a bit more a little bit later. Standardized admissions tests. Now, we talked about this before. This is mainly for the US, but you would need to submit that. certificate of extracurricular activities. This may be required by some universities, or you might have chosen to include this for a particular reason. But if you have mentioned this in your application, then you would need to supply evidence of that. Recommendation letters, or LOR. This is mainly for the US as well. And these are what we call letter of recommendations. So unlike the SOP, the letter of recommendation is an independent assessment of your potential. Some of these universities require, more than one of these letters, and it's advisable that you try to get them from your professors or employees or employers where you've worked, so that you can have people vouch for you. You might be required to submit your resume. So it's basically, supplying your resume is just like putting a CV together, and contains the basic information like date of birth, academic qualifications, and achievements, and so on. You might also be asked to write an essay. Again, it's not always required, but it might be required by the university, and you might be asked by the universities to choose a relevant topic of your interest, or they might give you a topic to write about, and they'll give you instructions on how many words, and this is just for them to get a feel for your ability to write essays. Another thing that I haven't spoken about is applying for your student visa. Now, it can be an intimidating thing to go through, because you often hear about students being refused visas, and the question is why? Why do they get refused? As I mentioned, hundreds of thousands of students do successfully get visas, but there are still there's still a big enough number of them getting refused. So we'll talk about that a little bit and understand what the main reasons are. So the common reasons for visa rejections. So number one, the visa officer does not believe that you intend to study. This sometimes can be determined by the officer with the documents that you've submitted, such as your SOP. And like I said before, that document is very, very important. So if you don't make an effort to show your genuine reasons for wanting to study abroad, that can hurt you. Or it can also be determined in an interview if you perform poorly. Or if the visa doesn't believe you have enough funds to support yourself. See, the visa officer, he needs to be, or she needs to be convinced that you have enough funds to fund your education and living expenses for the period of time that you'll be studying abroad. If the financial documents fail to convince them of your financial eligibility, this can lead to being denied. So it doesn't matter if you are convinced that you can afford to study abroad, you need to convince the visa officer. One of the more popular reasons, or common reasons, I should say, for being refused is that the visa officer does not believe you intend to come back home. So what you need to do as part of your application and your interview process is you need to be prepared to prove your strong roots in India or at home, your strong family ties, your business ties, any property that you might have, or anything that's tangible that will convince a visa officer that you have strong binds in your home country, that you're traveling abroad for education purposes only. Those are very important things to remember. Now, poor interview. The US is a good example where you will absolutely have to do a face-to-face interview with the visa officer. In other countries it may not be so, but in other countries you might have to have an interview by telephone, by Skype, and in some cases face-to-face. So when you're doing an interview, this process cannot be underestimated. It's like a job interview. So you just need to make sure that you know your stuff. What I mean by that is you need to know in advance about the university that you're applying for, the course that you're applying for, the location of the campus or the general area of where you're about to travel to, and your plans and goals. And what's important is that you're consistent with the documents that you've provided. And just like a job interview, just the little things such as like not being late, dressing appropriately if you're in person or about, in video conference, giving positive body language, and speaking clearly, because if they can't understand you, then it's not really helpful for your case. And also be confident and well-mannered. And the last one, suspicion of fraudulent documents. Unfortunately, there are cases where students try to take shortcuts, and when that happens, then it's a very quick rejection, and it's something that I would advise to avoid considering as much as possible. I would say at this point, I'm not a visa officer, look, these are what are the most common reasons for visa rejections. There could be others, but again, I'm not a visa officer, and things like applying for a visa or submitting your documents when applying for university, I think what I would advise is to get advice from good quality people that are experienced in their fields. We hear a lot about education agents, and there are thousands of education agents out there that give good advice, but I think you should also do your research about making sure that the agent that you're working with is going to do the right job for you, because some of them give better advice than others. So that's just a bit of advice in terms of getting proper advice for people that want to help you. So that just about concludes my presentation. We've talked about looking at how to get direct entry to university. We've talked about alternative pathways to get to that same destination. So we're all looking to go from A to B, and what I hope that I was able to show you today is that there are different ways to get to that same destination. So at this point, I'd like to thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure for me to speak with you today. I also thank, again, Credila for making this possible.